Welcome, everybody. My name is Joanna Pandera. I'm president of Forum Energii, and it's a pleasure on my side to welcome you to our webinar, EU Together, how collectively phase out Russian fossil fuels. And in this webinar, we would like to discuss the results of the analysis, which was jointly prepared by CREA, and Forum Energii as a proposal for the European Union, where we tried to analyze different position, different situation in different member states, and work out also on the proposals which in the spirit of solidarity, of collaboration, can help the EU be independent from Russian fossil fuel supplies. The situation in the European Union is quite complex at this stage. So we know that the approach towards energy transition based on renewables is right. However, there is a growing geopolitical tensions. We see also that energy prices are higher than it should be compared at least to other continents, and this became a big topic. Within the priorities of Clean Industrial Deal, we talk a lot about competitiveness, about decarbonization. What is very relevant is also focus on energy security. For Poland, where I'm coming from Warsaw, it has always been very relevant that we will make our relationships, energy relationships, really strategic, and we will not depend on countries who can threaten us at some point of time. And at this stage, it is extremely relevant that we will consequently work on the EU regulation, which will help us to implement those actions which we propose, but also EU has proposed. Also, we see that the energy security paradigm, which we knew in the EU, is changing. The last energy security strategy was prepared in 2014, and it was mainly focusing on diversifying fossil fuel supplies. We are now in the process. Also, Polish presidency contributed to this EU discussion that we need new approach to energy security. We need sustainable energy security with a predominant big role of renewables, flexibility and electrification, where also the role of fossil fuels will steadily decline. But at this stage, we know the priority is should be focused on really making the relationships with Russia and those relationships. But also what is relevant is that the process will be smooth, will be cost effective, and will not create more anxiety among EU citizens or industry that this is not coordinated action. So this is why I have the pleasure to welcome today's speakers, and we have among us Peter Kotek, Senior Research Associate from Regional Center for Energy Policy Research, REC, from Hungary. Welcome, Peter. We have Isaac Levy from Europe-Russia Policy Energy Analysis team from CREA. We have Maciej Ciszewski, Head of Unit, Diversification and Joint Purchasing from the European Commission. Welcome, Maciej. And we have also Alexander Wien, Team Leader, also from the European Commission, DG ENER. And I don't want to take more of your time, and I would like to hand over to Maciej Zaniewicz, who will make a short introduction about our proposals, and then we will have discussion. All the questions are very much welcomed. Yes, I invite you to our webinar. Thanks a lot.
Hello, welcome everyone. Once again, my name is Maciej Zaniewicz. I'm senior analyst at Forum Energii, and I have a pleasure to be a moderator during this discussion. Just quick technical remarks. We will have Q&A session at the end of our panel, so you are very welcome to ask questions in chat. Please address your questions. You can start it even right now if you have very urgent questions. I will ask them to our speakers. So please address to whom you would like ask question. You can also, of course, include comments if you would like to. Just to begin with, I think it is worth also to remind why we are pursuing these policies. Joanna Pandera mentioned that we are in the middle. We are on the path of our Repower EU policy. We are on the path of decoupling from Russia. The target, the goal is to become fully independent until the end of 2027. We have ongoing negotiations on regulation on Russian natural gas, but I think that it is good also to step back and ask yourself a question why we are doing this. Yaga, if you could put on the presentation, please. Thank you. First of all, the policy of diversification mentioned by Joanna as well, it was absolutely obvious for some countries and was implemented in some countries like Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, but it wasn't the EU policy, fully implemented policy until 2022, and basically it was in the European energy security strategy in 2014, although majority of countries were still having relations with Russia. Import was even increasing periodically. So it wasn't a fully implemented policy after first invasion, annexation of Crimea in 2014. It was because Russia wasn't still perceived as a country weaponizing energy against the EU. In fact, it was weaponizing, but only towards some countries. But one thing changed dramatically after 2022 or even 2021, and that was the first case of weaponization of energy, namely more specifically natural gas against the whole bloc, against the whole European Union, which happened in 2021. It was even before Russian invasion on Ukraine. It was when, before winter season, Russia emptied Russian-controlled gas storages in the EU and also decreased supply of natural gas to the European Union, which, as you can see here, caused the unprecedented spike of prices of natural gas on TTF spot in the EU. And it even increased in 2022 after Russian invasion on Ukraine. So, as you can see, this was the biggest crisis in the history of natural gas market in the EU, and energy crisis as well. And prices still didn't come back to the level from before of this crisis. So that was the moment when all realized that Russia is weaponizing energy to put pressure on European countries. And that's why, for the first time in history also, the EU launched a very decisive and concrete policy to decouple from Russia, to decouple from partner which occurred to be completely unreliable. It has three dimensions, not only diversification, which was the topic even in 2014, but also, and we should still have this in mind, diversification of energy sources. So speeding up of renewables in the EU, so domestically produced energy, and reducing demand, so energy efficiency. So this was the very well structured policy, and this time really implemented successfully, in my opinion. even though we are still having import from Russia. But what we still should have in mind is that from the EU perspective, the problem is not only with Russia itself, but is in the EU reliance on imported fossil fuels. The EU, treated as a bloc, is the biggest net importer of energy and fossil fuels in the world. So this is the biggest, the huge challenge for the EU. That even if not Russia, we still can have problems, such problems in the future. And why I think that it is still, but is quite successful policy, because this time EU really decreased reliance on Russia substantially in oil, in coal, but also in gas. Even though it's still an issue to address, we still have import of Russian natural gas and oil. When we look at value of imported products, import decreased by 80%. So I'm mentioning that because sometimes we tend to over criticize the EU and its policies, but we have to remember that that was a huge issue. And if we look at the value, it was really implemented, is being implemented quite successfully if you compare it, for example, to reaction after 2014. But if you look at the breakdown of products, we see that about 50% of import is about natural gas and LNG, and we still have crude oil imported. So we still have some loopholes in these policies which should be addressed. And when it comes to LNG, you can see it here, but you can tell that it was addressed by the last sanctions package. So we still have import of LNG to many European countries, but well, we can say that it was addressed already. The another loophole, which is much more problematic, is let's say Hungarian Slovak loophole, which and if you see these numbers, it's graphed by KRIA. You can see that reliance on Russian natural gas in Hungary and Slovakia even increased after 2022. So it completely contradicts the EU policy. And it's only the case of these two countries. Even countries which are still importing LNG decreased its reliance on Russian resources. So we see that this is still a loophole to address. There is attempt to do so by regulation, which is right now negotiated in the EU. And that's why we wanted to have this today's discussion, also including our colleague from REC from Hungary to discuss why it is still ongoing, what the stage of the repower policy, and how could we also include Hungary and Slovakia on its policies. It's possible or not, how to do so to fully and successfully implement the repower policy, or I would rather have to say to end our path, which is, as you can see, until now quite successful. And without further ado, coming to our discussion, I would like to pass the floor to Maciej Ciszewski, Head of Unit of Diversification and Joint Purchasing in DGNR and European Commission, to also address from the EU, from the European Commission perspective. As Maciej, as we can see, we are quite far on this path, but of reaching repower EU goals. So how would you assess overall European energy security situation, not only with this policy, but overall energy security situation, and what's the stage of the Repower EU implementation?
Thank you, Maciej. Good morning, everyone. First, apologies for my background, and if you hear any noise, I am traveling, but I didn't want to miss this event. I value very much Forum Energii and substance-based energy policy discussions across Europe and in Poland. So thanks, Forum Energii. Let me build on what you said, Maciej. Indeed, the context is very important here. Since decades, we've been building a European energy market with very important role of natural gas. Our demand for natural gas has been increasing, reaching more than 400 billion cubic meters in the last years, while our production in the European Union has been decreasing. So against this background, Russian gas reached, as you rightly pointed out, 45% before the crisis across Europe, which is an enormous amount when you take into account that some countries had practically zero, for example, Portugal, while some other countries were exposed 100%. So how do you diversify away from this big dependence? It is not possible overnight with such a big market. So what we have been doing as the European Commission, we've been supporting diversification very strongly, and this has to be said as well, via notably, on the one hand, supporting diversification infrastructure. So across Europe, you have a lot of pipelines and LNG terminals supported by the European Commission to provide member states, notably in Central Eastern Europe, Poland, Baltic countries, but not only, with alternatives. This was still before the full escalation and the war. Internal energy market and the fact that the gas could be moving across Europe was one of the best weapons against potential weaponization, and it served us well in the crisis. However, what happened in 21 and 22, so basically full-scale war and full weaponization by Russia, was without precedence. We have seen disruptions before, but this was absolutely without precedence. And this is when the EU leaders in Versailles took a decision, or maybe showed a direction of travel that security risk of Russian energy sources, including gas, are just too big to carry. I can tell you that both in Europe and in Brussels, not many people believe that we would be endeavoring and continuing on this path. It is a huge challenge. And the fact that we are now down from 45% to around 10% is an enormous achievement. It is a historical step, basically, I can say. Last 10%, of course, is the hardest to achieve because this dependence is not evenly distributed across Europe. For some countries, it's already zero for quite some time. For some others, the exposure to Russian gas is still big, and we have to understand that this challenge for them, for countries including Slovakia and Hungary, is still difficult. What we proposed in June is a very ambitious and concrete proposal to phase out to zero by 27. When you think about it, 2 years to phase out remaining 10 BCM is a very aggressive and very bold policy. This applies to new contracts as of 1st of January 26. It applies also to short-term imports by June 26, and by 27, all long-term contracts, even existing ones, which is a challenge on its own. Now, we are not alone in this process. European Commission cannot decide on the phase-out on their own, so this is our proposal. As you may know, European Council is already ready for the discussions, and there is a discussion mandate, negotiation mandate by the Parliament. So we hope that this can become a fixed policy still this year, and as of next year, basically we'll be implementing it. So to sum up, I think we have learned a hard lesson in 22 that partial steps are not enough, and now we are determined, and this is really a historic policy. So I would like to see the glass half full. Maybe we come a bit late to this constatation, but in the price environment and global uncertainty context, which is uneasy, we are very bold and we continue with the policy of total phase out together with member states and the EU countries. So I am very proud that the European Commission is leading this together with the European countries. And I think we are on the path to actually make this reality against many people who would never believe that this can happen. I think it will happen. And it is only with the leadership of European Commission and like-minded partners that this was possible. Thanks very much. This is a short intro from my side. Alexander will stay throughout the event. I will also listen in and he can address more specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Maciej. Thank you for joining us. Isaac Lewis from Korea. Unfortunately, for technical reasons, also Isaac will be without video. But Isaac, we've published together a report on that matter in July. Since then, many things changed. Some loopholes has been fixed, but since you in Korea, I think you're the best when it comes to monitoring the flow of Russian resources worldwide, also to the EU. What loopholes are still existing? I know that you have a presentation, so could you shed us some light on this current situation as well?
Thank you very much to Forum Energy and Maciej for having me today. It's great to work with such a brilliant organization. And we also are very thankful to the EU Commission who've worked very hard, Alexander and colleagues, on this Repower EU plan. But I'm going to focus on some of the loopholes in the sanctions, slightly beyond Repower EU to some extent. So the chart on the left-hand side was taken from our 3-year anniversary report, showing the different methods that Russian oil and gas continues to flow into the bloc, and the darker color representing those biggest buyers in the 3rd year of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. On the right-hand side, it's a screen grab from our live fossil tracker, which shows where Russia is selling its fossil fuels to finance their full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and a breakdown by commodity type as well as buyer. So we are an independent data-led organization that provide analysis tracking Russia's fossil fuels and measuring the impact of the sanctions, as well as identifying some of the loopholes in the legislation. We're quite a small team. We try to therefore provide dynamic analysis ahead of the curve, being one of the first organizations to report on the refining loophole, which should be banned as of the 18 sanctions package in July this year. So about 83% of all Russia's military spending is covered through their tax revenues from oil and gas, showing the link between the oil and gas sector and how they are reliant on this finance to continue their full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Sanctions have reduced Russia's export revenues, but the impact has been decreasing over time as evasion techniques have developed and loopholes have remained unresolved to some extent. The Russian economy, as a result, has been struggling, and it's shocking stat, I think, that the GDP levels now are still at pre-invasion of Crimea levels, so the same levels in 2025 as 2013. If you compare that to Putin's first 2 terms in office, the economy grew, I believe, around 8.5 times. So this is as a result of partly sanctions, but the way that Russia is cutting itself off from key markets in Europe, and the EU helping themselves do so with the implementation of sanctions. So in September, the most recent full month of data we have, Russia's fossil fuel export revenues dropped 4%, and they've now hit the lowest levels since their full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russian gas, however, does continue to flow into the bloc despite transit through the Ukrainian pipeline. Levels this year about 5% lower than last year. So one of the loopholes, as we mentioned, on gas is the Turk Stream pipeline. So Turk Stream sends Russian gas to Europe, sending around 22 billion euros in revenues to Moscow. Flows, we believe, are sold at around 13 to 15% lower in price to those EU buyers compared to non-Russian gas flows. Until, of course, the Repower EU measures, there have been no financial reason for companies to stop relying on Russian gas. This leaves them companies acting in their best interest to boost profits, but whilst also leaving the region vulnerable to energy blackmail and discouraging diversification. So one area to mention is the Repower EU regulation proposed by the European Commission requires 2 important entry points. These strands are Melkokla 1 entry point and Kipoy to provide certification that the gas entering the bloc is not from Russia. But we are slightly concerned that this will get removed from the final legislation. So this is something we are monitoring closely. Crude oil continues to flow to Central and Eastern Europe through Ukraine, and that's to 2 countries now, Hungary and Slovakia. So Hungary used to be about 61% reliant on Russian crude in 2021, and I've just recently updated the numbers. This year, it looks as though it's about 92%. So a massive increase and an exploitation in the exemption that they were provided to the EU sanctions. These two countries have sent over 5.5 billion euros in tax revenues to the Kremlin for the import of this crude oil. So MOL must be prohibited from buying from now the US sanctioned Lukoil and Rosneft, and also Rosneft sanctioned by the EU too. We worry they might find other ways around it. For example, what we saw in summer of 2024, when Lukoil was sanctioned by Ukraine, flows were able to maintain as they shifted supply from non-sanctioned companies such as Tatneft. So this is something to be aware of. We know that Hungary and Slovakia do have sufficient alternatives to get crude oil through the Energii pipeline that could satisfy both their countries' demand, as well as the refineries not being able to process non-Russian crude, which is a claim that we have debunked. So MOL and the Hungarian government have been able to capture most of the benefit of discounted Russian crude oil, which we estimated as about 20% discount last year. But we know that fuel prices in Hungary remain about 5% above the EU average. So those consumers are not the ones that are benefiting from this continued reliance on Russia. In our investigation and relying on other information, we've seen that discounted Russian crude oil does increase about 5% in price when entering Hungary. And this is due to some intermediaries such as Normiston siphoning off hundreds of millions of euros to make a profit out of this and somewhat clean Russia's oil on its way to the EU. We can probably skip this, but the excuses we mentioned that MOL is making, that they cannot rely on non-Russian supply for the refineries, which has not been true. That's been disproven by one of the downstream productions, and they have been buying non-Russian crude through the Druzhba in 2019 when there was a contamination of product. The Janaf pipeline, which is a widely debated topic, does it have sufficient capacity to meet demand for both countries? We believe it could do so at 80% capacity. So through increasing the expansion of the pipeline if needed, or using drag resistant agents, they could easily have a security of supply from non-Russian crude suppliers. Using the case of Bulgaria, Bulgaria also exploited its exemption in the EU sanctions. It went from about 70% reliant on Russian crude oil to 90% with that 1 year period that they had to reduce reliance. And then actually pretty much overnight, they ended imports of Russian crude after some work CSD, our partners, and us did in Bulgaria. And they haven't experienced increasing fuel prices at all. It's actually lower prices than some of their neighboring countries, which could be used as an example in Czechia too. Re-exported Russian oil products. So this is an area that requires more enforcement from those importers, mostly in Greece, as you can see here. These are 3 ports in Turkey, in the middle of the diagram on the right-hand side, that have no connection to refinery or an oil products pipeline. They rely almost 90% on their imports of refined oil products from Russia, and they export quantities, I believe almost double the supply that doesn't come from, the imports from non-Russian supply are about half the exports coming to the EU. So this begs the question, where is this oil coming from? Likely it's Russian oil that's being relabeled as Turkish or non-Russian and sending billions into the Kremlin again. After the US threatened sanctions of one of these terminals undertaking this trade of Russian oil and then exporting to the EU, they actually ended imports, as you can see in the diagram on the right-hand side, as fear of secondary sanctions can be very powerful. However, there are still ports within these Turkish re-export hubs that are continuing this trade, and it's something we need to clamp down on. Stopping the shadow fleet. So these are environmentally dangerous tankers with non-Western ownership or insurance. So before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started in January 2022, about 80% of all Russian oil was transported on Western-owned or insured tankers. The price cap policy required the use of Western tankers to prove that the oil was paid below $60 per barrel. Russia was faced with two options, under which it's taken both strategies. One is to increase its access to shadow tankers that don't have to comply with the price cap. And two is to violate the policy by fraudulently reporting the price paid. In September, about half of all Russia's oil is transported on shadow tankers, higher for crude and lower for products. In the most recent month, we identified 18 Russian shadow tankers which fly a false flag and carried almost €1 billion of Russian oil globally. So these tankers have a lack of insurance and often don't meet compliance requirements. So they are dangerous, as well as financing Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So a third of all Russia's fossil fuel export revenues was transported on these oil tankers. An investigation with Politico identified 7 different oil spills on Russian shadow tankers, with no reporting of a cleanup in this oil spill. So either this is huge environmental damage or the cost of cleanup falls on those coastal states. So this is something we're asking those coastal states to detain and inspect tankers that have a false flag, and there is a legal ability to do so, as well as detaining those tankers that have spilt oil in European coastlines. So recently sharing a case study in Taiwan. So we did a report in Taiwan which showed a 6-fold increase in the island's imports of Russian refined naphtha. This is because there were no bans on imports from Russia, and therefore companies were able to do whatever is in their best interest. So one specific example is the refinery in Mailiao, which imported over $4 billion of Russian refined naphtha. They processed some of this Russian refined naphtha into petrochemicals that was sent to the EU, US, and UK, and that's valued at over $300 million. So these shipments, we think, did contain Russian naphtha, as the feedstock to produce those petrochemicals is around 90%. So we mentioned the great success of the EU's ban on oil products made from Russian crude in the 18th sanctions package, but this trade will be legally able to continue, as it doesn't ban petrochemicals made from Russian fuels. So after a report and some advocacy work with local groups, the largest buyer in Taiwan announced they would stop importing from Russia, which could cut off around $200 million a month in export revenues. So coming to the end, we have some recommendations and modeled impact of how to slash Russia's fossil fuel export revenues further, which, as we mentioned, could include cutting off flows through the Druzhba, banning imports through Turk Stream, a price cap for Russian LNG during the phase-out period, and a lower price cap for Russian crude oil and products, as well as tighter enforcement. And on the enforcement of the price cap policy, we have seen lots of evidence stating that there have been violations of this, one of which is by traders inflating the price of the freight and insurance that's reported in the price. So one recommendation we have is to set the price at that CIF cost, which includes the cost of freight or insurance rather than just for the cost of the oil. And this is estimated as being able to cut Russia's fossil oil export revenues by around 30%, as well as verifying through bank statements and contracts to show the price was actually paid below the cap level. Thanks very much for your time. I'll stop there and pass to the next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Isaac. And thank you for reminding us also about what I haven't mentioned before, that one of the goals of this policy is not only to increase resistance of the EU, but also to limit Russia's capacity to finance its war machine. That's why looking at this ways to circumvent sanctions below the surface is also very important. So thank you for doing so. And right now I would like to move to Peter Kotek from REC, Hungary, because Peter, we have plenty of misinformation when it comes to Hungarian and Slovak reliance on Russian fossil fuels. Many say that it is fully possible to diversify out of Russia. Others say that it is completely impossible, and that's why Hungary is still reliant. And there is also a question of a price. If this is possible for Hungary to become independent from Russian natural gas, what would be the price of that? Because many argue that it would be unbearable for Hungarians. And obviously, the price of energy is at the very end of the discussion crucial here. We cannot afford energy on not affordable prices. So, Peter, could you please explain this for us, since you do a great job on also tracking energy flows in the region?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Peter Kotek. I work at Regional Center for Energy Policy Research. It's an independent university think tank in Hungary. So all the views I will share you are not the official Hungarian viewpoints, but rather views of an independent research institute. I was asked to tell you about how is it possible to decouple from Russian gas for Hungary. And to answer this question, I follow the approach to tell you a little bit about the state of play in gas markets in Hungary, first on the technical capacities of the system, and then on the contractual background, the long-term supply contracts in force in Hungary. And after that, I would like to showcase a little bit of our analysis and our work. At REC, we have an in-house developed gas market model, which is able to assess the future effects of policies like the Repower Roadmap, how it would affect the gas markets throughout Europe, and how it would affect the prices themselves. So without further ado, I will a little bit talk about the natural gas infrastructure in Hungary. As you know, Hungary has 7 neighboring countries, and out of these 7 neighboring countries, we are interconnected with 6. So it is a really well interconnected network. The annual consumption used to be around 10 billion cubic meters per year of natural gas. After the energy crisis, due to the price increase and energy efficiency investments, it decreased to around 8.5 to 9 billion cubic meter. To supply this demand, we have around 47 billion cubic meter of entry capacity. So this is the total sum of transmission capacities, pipelines entering the country, and the total capacity of storages and production. One might argue that, of course, you shouldn't consider the Ukrainian entry points or the Serbian entry points, which used to be or which are the entry points for Russian gas. But with taking this out, we are still left with around 21 billion cubic meters a year. So compared to this 8.5 BCM demand, it's more than enough. And even if we take out the storage capacities, which are a really important security of supply source, but you need to fill up these storages from interconnectors, you are filled with nearly 15 billion cubic meters. So I would say that capacity-wise, there is not an issue. This is a result of long-term Hungarian and EU policies, that Hungary is so much interconnected and has ample pipeline capacities. And for this reason, I would say that capacity-wise from the pipelines, there is no issue. So it can be solved and it can be replaced. But of course, it is one thing to have the pipeline itself, but you need supply of natural gas contracts to fill up these pipes. The contract we are talking about of MVM, the Hungarian company which is in contractual relations with Gazprom, was concluded in 2021 for 4.5 billion cubic meters per year, and it is in force until 2036. So this is the contract that would be affected by the Repower roadmap itself. MVM has already started diversification in 2021 when they booked terminal capacity in the crude terminal, and they already made contracts with Shell and Energii in the past months, albeit for smaller volumes, altogether 0.6 billion cubic meters per year for the future 10-year period. And MVM also has a stake in the Shah Deniz offshore field in Azerbaijan for 1.5 billion cubic meter per year production. This will come online after 2030. If you add up these volumes, they are still missing, of course, but it must be stressed that this 4.5 billion cubic meter was contracted for the supply of residential consumers. After the energy crisis, this demand of residential consumers dropped to 3 billion cubic meters. So we need less gas, and the diversification has already started from MVM's side, as opposed to the really strong communication of the Hungarian government that we cannot do without Russian gas. The company has already started to diversify and look for alternative sources. And we think that these missing volumes will be met by future long-term contracts or short-term agreements. But it is one thing to list the capacities and the contracts and the volumes for Hungary. But as you know, the European gas market is quite a strongly interconnected system. And for this reason, at REC, we have the European gas market model, which represents the gas networks and gas infrastructure in Europe. What this model does and what it allows us to do is to show an equilibrium situation where the consumers of Europe are procuring gas at the least cost, taking into account all the technical constraints of the network, so be that pipelines, LNG terminals, storages, and all the regulatory and contractual constraints. So we consider the storage obligation, we consider the tariffs on this network, we consider the routing of long-term contracts. So taking all these constraints into account, the model can provide us with average procurement price for natural gas, wholesale natural gas for each of the national markets in Europe, the flows on the network, and such the procurement costs for natural gas for all the countries. The details are listed in a journal publication I included in the bottom of the slide. And what this model allows us to do is to perform the analysis of the repower policy. This is ongoing research. Of course, I can show you some preliminary results, but to back up this, we have done similar analysis in the past for Russian gas phase-out since 2021, with a little bit of varying assumptions. The most recent, I think, where you can delve into the details is our study on the future of gas deliveries to Austria, published in 2024, which includes not only the ending of gas deliveries to Austria, but also the effects on Slovakia and Hungary with the disappearance of the transit via Ukraine. But to model the repower itself, as you know, this regulation comes with the banning of Russian gas from 1st of January 2026, with transitional periods for short-term contracts until mid-2026 and long-term contracts until 2028, 1st of January. This applies to both LNG and pipeline gas. And how we model this is by as so-called scenario analysis. We consider a state of the world when there is no regulation, and then we introduce the regulation and see what it causes in the prices. For this, I show you two scenarios. First, the Repower EU takes effect in the EU27, and the second a little bit stricter even, that on top of that, the Turkish stream flows to Balkans countries like Bosnia, Serbia, and North Macedonia are also halted due to the low utilization of the pipeline. And without further teasing you with the assumptions, I can show you the results. On these maps, you can see how much the price increases in each country compared to the case when there is no such regulation. On the left-hand side, you see the repower takes into effect in 2028. On the right-hand side, you see repower, and on top of that, there is no gas for the Balkans countries. The highest effect we could measure is 0.5, 0.6 euro per megawatt hour in the case of Hungary, if the regulation is there. So considering the current price level of 30 to 40 euro per megawatt hour for gas prices, this is around a 1 to 2% price increase, which is quite negligible. And if we consider that even if we ban Balkans country trade on the Turk Stream pipeline, in that case, it may increase to 0.6, 0.8. So it is not really a problem in this sense. Those volumes that are missing could be easily replaced with LNG from alternative sources. The main results of our modeling always show that whenever there is enough gas in Europe altogether, then these volumes can find their ways to landlocked countries such as Slovakia or Hungary and easily replace the missing volumes. So to sum up, I would like to say that according to our analysis, capacity-wise, there is no issue of supplying Hungary from alternative sources. We had a strong diversification strategy on the past that built well interconnected network and huge storage infrastructure. And well, despite the strong stance of Hungarian government against the repower plan, the diversification itself has already started on contracts. In the last months, we have seen MVM to contract Energii and Shell for smaller volumes. And to finish this line of thought, our modeling suggests that the roadmap implementation will have negligible effect on the prices and gas bills of consumers by 2028. And by this, I mean that the strong resistance of the Hungarian government towards the Russian gas phase is mostly of political nature. So it is not based on the technical realities. It is not based on the market realities. If you're interested in how we assess this in detail, you can find our studies from 2022 listed on this slide. And I'm really happy to answer any of your questions. I hope that it was interesting for you. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, indeed, it was very interesting. Thank you very much, Peter. And I have a question also to Alexander Wien from European Commission. We are right now in the middle of trying to look into how to, let's say, fix this loophole. So I mean regulation on Russian natural gas, which is right now negotiated. Could you shed some light on what's the status of this negotiation and what can we expect, or also when can we expect the like official putting into force of this document?
Yes, thank you very much, Maciej, and good morning to everyone. As Maciej Dziszewski said in the introduction, the process is now well advanced. EU member states in the Council agreed what we call a general approach, so they have their preliminary view on the Commission's proposal. To a large extent, this position of the Council reflects what we had in our own legislative proposal. But there is a particularly important element that was added when it comes to enforcement and avoiding circumvention. The Council added a whole pre-authorization procedure, which would empower national administrations to look into import transactions before they happen. Because normally when you go through customs procedures. It's a little bit lighter, and often it's done a posteriori when the gas is already in the system, and this is something we would want to avoid. Here I wanted to flag an important element, because obviously I think everyone in this call shares the objective of the REPower EU regulation. However, we have to put into balance the ease of doing business by honest traders. So we have to find a way to make sure that importing Russian gas, once it's prohibited, becomes very hard, if not impossible. But at the same time, we should not disturb normal market operations, which are essential from a security of supply perspective. So this is an important, I think, addition that happened in the process. Just to, shed a bit of light on the negotiations, but I think this was covered by the press. It is not that there are only two countries that are unhappy with what's going on. Each, different member states have their different interests, and economic interests and security of supply interests, all across the continent. So this general approach reflects a little bit those needs. So some people would call them weakening of the regulation. I'm not convinced. I prefer to have a good regulation than a perfect one that is not adopted. And now we will start the negotiations with the parliament. The parliament did their part of the job, so they had a first report adopted on their end. I think it comes clearly from this parliamentary work that they are very keen to have it adopted, very keen to have it solid. In many cases, going beyond what we suggested, and maybe going into this territory of making it difficult to implement. A side remark also I wanted to make is that we obviously do it because of the war in Ukraine. However, and that's fundamental from the legal perspective, this legislative proposal is based on a trade legal basis. It is based on a trade legal basis because we're here to protect our own internal market. It has been mentioned a number of times. Russia weaponizes energy sources against us, disturbed on a number of cases the normal market functioning because Gazprom did not behave like a normal market operator, and this triggered havoc and chaos on our market and for our citizens. This is why we can take this route to remove Russian gas from our internal market. It is our economic security that is protected, and this is legal in the context of international law. This prerequisite also has an influence on the shape of the regulation itself. A point I wanted to make quickly, if I may, Maciej, because I noticed one of the questions in the chat, and Peter referred to that as well. We are convinced that there is available gas on the market. I think anyone who follows the international gas market by now would well know that the Americans are doubling the size of their LNG production capacity. Qatar is also increasing a lot their own production. So all of this means that there will be gas available, and this is why we very much agree with Peter's view that any market effects of this regulation on the EU, price effects on the EU market would be negligible because those alternatives exist. So in this sense, while there may be changes on specific local markets, there is no or very limited need, I think, for any financial compensation. And this is not something a priori in broad terms. I'm not here to take this kind of decisions or views, but a priori is not justified. So I'll stop here. I can see some other questions are coming, but I hand over back to you, Maciej.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for those questions as well. We will address them a bit later. And I have just one very important question for you, Peter Kotek, follow up. How do you think? What is it possible? So maybe not from energy analytical point of view, but a bit from political point of view. What is is it possible to have Hungary and Slovakia on board of these policies, or in your opinion, Hungary will resist? Because we see that those fears are rather not based on analysis of the energy market. So reasons are probably different. So how to have Hungary on board, not just try to bypass Hungary, which could be not very effective. I
I think it's a really good question, but unfortunately, I do not have the answer for that. So we stopped the analysis that there is no technical and no market constraint, and from that it's politics, and I cannot really tell how to bring Hungary and Slovakia on board. Sorry for that, but I have no answer for that.
Sure, that's indeed very hard question. Okay, let's go to questions from audience because we have plenty of them. All right, so I think this one is for you, Alexander. Are there any? Oh, sorry, that. Are there any sanctions foreseen for Hungary and Slovakia for increasingly relying on Russian fossil fuels, not even passing the saving costs to final consumers? And maybe just to add a bit to this question, how do you assess the risk of Hungary and Slovakia not implementing, for example, the regulation? Do you think that it is possible, or yeah, what's your opinion on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'll take the liberty of interpreting the word sanctions not as restrictive measures, but let's call it punishment in kind of very broad terms. I don't think that as the Union we can, in this sense, punish any member state and single out any member state in this context. As I was saying, and it was visible, I think, in Isaac's presentation. Hungary and Slovakia are not the only importers of Russian gas, are not the only ones who have not reduced intake of Russian gas since the start of the war in 2022. So I wouldn't want certainly single out any member state in particular. I think the right answer is the REPowerEU regulation. If we end imports for everyone more or less at the same date, then it's a fair way of doing it. Also, let's remember that the EU treaties give the right to each and every member state to determine their energy mix. So it's not legally it's not straightforward to navigate between this freedom that each member state has, and by the way, general international trade law that gives them the possibility to import gas as long as it's not prohibited, right? So if we set aside any moral views that we may have on what was happening and what is happening, legally speaking, not really. Also, let's remember, and this is a bit more political, that there are still some decisions that are taken by unanimity in the EU, and all member states are equal in this sense. So they are fully entitled to defend their interest, whatever we think of their interest. Sorry, Maciej, can you remind me the second part of the question, please?
Yeah, because regulations wouldn't be passed by
yes.
committee. Yeah.
Sorry, now I remember. So it's very hard for me to comment on what would happen if. I'm not sure there is any precedent for a kind of blatant lack of implementation, lack of application of EU law. This would trigger a serious legal problem, I think, but the Commission is certainly there to enforce EU legislation. I think from a more practical standpoint, let's remember that this legislation, which is between energy law and customs and trade law would be ultimately, at the end of the day, enforced on the ground by national administrations and national customs. So that's also a reality that we have to remember. But yeah, so I wouldn't dare to go that far, Maciej, and say, what would we do? I think the Hungarian minister, Szijjártó, publicly said that they would consider suing us anyways when regulation, if and when the regulation is adopted. So this is not my statement, this is the statement of the Hungarian government. So we can reasonably imagine litigation around this regulation. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Isaac, this one will be for you. A question from Petra Sander Griffin. How about the price of oil in light of recent sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft? Isaac, are you with us? Okay, so
I am sorry, I had a bit of an internet cutout. Would you mind repeating the question? I'm happy to. I can see that Anna Yazaveta.
sure.
Which question was it?
About
Sorry?
the price of oil in light of the sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft? What would be the impact of price of oil in the EU? I suppose that was the essence of the question.
Thanks for that. I mean, it'll very much depend on the region, of course. Like we mentioned, Hungary and Slovakia basically get all of their crude oil now from Russia still, but the impact of the other regions, sorry, are not relying on Russia now. So if we're referring to the EU's ban on oil products made from Russian crude, the effects will be very minimal because this is a very small proportion of the EU's total consumption. And the price discount they're offered to buy oil products made from those refineries that do run on Russian crude is small. It's about 6%, and it makes up about 5% of the total bloc's imports. So that would be very minimal. If it's about US sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, I guess there might be effect for Hungary and Slovakia. We've seen a case study in Czechia where they have very quickly diversified supply away from Russia earlier this year. I believe it was April 2025. And they have experienced actually lower fuel prices than Hungary and Slovakia. So it might hit MOL's profits and margins, I would say, but I think it's very feasible they can attain supply through the Adria pipeline without having too many issues. What they do in terms of requesting extension in the carve out perhaps from the US sanctions, I'm not so sure. We did see, like we mentioned a little bit in the presentation, if they do maintain flows through the Druzhba of Russian oil, claiming that the company selling is perhaps Tatneft or one of the non-sanctioned companies, then I guess impact of prices will be minimal.
Thank you. And coming back to natural gas, there is also a question to Peter, to you, about gas stocks. So did Hungary use gas from strategic gas stocks since they were created after 2006, and by which circumstances?
Thank you. It's, I think, a really good question. The strategic stocks were created after a gas crisis in 2006, and they were set at 1.2 billion cubic meter. They were not released in a sense that we said that it's an emergency or something like that, but the level of these stocks of 1.2 billion cubic meter was set dynamically. So at the peak of the energy crisis in 2022, it was lowered to around 800 million cubic meters, and those volumes were dedicated to residential consumers. But afterwards, they were again refilled to this 1.2 billion cubic meter. On top of that, during the peak of the energy crisis, an 0.7 billion cubic meter special stocks were also created. Those have not been released yet. So in a sense, some of these strategic stocks have been released at the peak of the energy crisis, but not the whole capacity.
Thank you. And coming back to Alexander, to you once again, which parts of the parliament's position do you consider not enforceable? Tricky question. Could you answer to that?
Yes, I certainly don't consider any parts non-enforceable. I think I was saying that it's more challenging, more complicated. I think so rather, let's speak in broad terms. For instance, bringing the date forward. We as the Commission made an assessment when we made the proposal. The mandate from the EU leaders was to have it gradual. Do not shake do not rock the boat. In the introduction, we've heard the topic of competitiveness. So the guiding rationale was to make sure that this phase out fits with the addition of new resources globally. And obviously, the global market is very dynamic, and we don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know exactly what is going to happen. So to be on the safe side and avoid unpleasant surprises, if there is again a crisis in the Middle East or a change of policy in the US or anything, we cannot be without any slack in the system. So the dates we proposed correspond to an environment where we believe there would be no unpleasant surprises when it comes to prices. Bringing it forward can probably work. However, it simply increases the risk. That's it on the side. All of this having in mind that we have also adopted now sanctions on LNG. Truth to be said, the LNG market is obviously less rigid than imports by pipeline, so we can assume as a reshuffling on the LNG market that would allow other LNG from other sources to come to us and replace it. So in this sense, this decision was also safe. So then again, not speaking as the Commission, but simply pointing out to some differences I can see between the views of the two co-legislators. The revision or review clause in Article 15 was very important for some EU member states. The Parliament is more keen to put a definitive end to Russian imports. It's not easy to square the circle to have both somehow. So this is good. I mean, this is complicated. So not non-enforceable, but problematic probably when it comes to having a regulation that makes sense. This question of revision, no revision, etc., has probably implications when it comes to arbitrations for companies. People who may want to claim force majeure, they would need to demonstrate that the measure in question is of a firm nature. So there are implications for member states and for companies that simply make it a delicate matter. This is what I wanted to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. And I will stay a bit with you for now. There is very interesting also question about connected with diversification and also with the United States. And I can say that we just had also we've been present in Washington during a conference on Brookings, and that was really the question asked from everyone in the US about CSDDD. So the question is on the sidelines of the GCF meeting, Qatar and the United States issued a joint open letter to heads of state of European Union member countries expressing deep concern over the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSD3, a new EU law designed to enforce environmental and human rights standards across global supply chains. The letter warned that the directive as worded today, poses a significant risk to the affordability and reliability of critical energy supplies for households and businesses across Europe, and an existential threat to the future growth, competitiveness, and reliance of the EU's industrial economy. How will the EU tackle this? And thank you, Velina Chakarova, for asking this question and being with us. Alexander?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think I use my joker card on this and reply only partially because it's a very sensitive matter and I'm not mandated to speak about it. What I can say is that we have been aware of this topic for a good while. There was an exchange of information between the countries concerned and us. I can point out to a process that I don't know well, which is the omnibus proposal that was meant to address key concerns of those countries and companies around the CSDDD topic. And I think the discussions are ongoing. So on the one hand, we have a piece of legislation that is important. I think bringing some clarity to value chains and production chains across the world is fundamental from an ecological perspective, from human rights perspective. But finding a reason, but on the other hand, we also have the topic of ease of doing business globally. So energy stands out as an important topic. So in this context, but I'm sure it's applicable to other domains as well. And lastly, I would say I think both us and Qatar, US, and certainly other countries actually value the trade in energy carriers that we have. So I'm sure that a solution will be found so that this trade can continue because we both need it. We both need it, us and them. So a solution will be certainly found very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And Isaac, could you comment on that? And the other thing, which is also connected with diversification, global flow of natural gas. If there is no reduction of overall gas demand, isn't diversification of EU gas supplies just redistributing Russian gas to the consumers other than the EU, but not really reducing their revenues? So two questions basically. Firstly, if CSDDD could influence diversification of natural gas supplies to the EU, and the second one, what about Russian gas, which will not reach the European Union? What will be going on with it, and how to enforce the policy of reducing incomes of the Russian budget?
Sure, thanks for that. I'm not such an expert on CSDDD, and I think Alexander and Maciej have been very helpful in their response. I'll probably use my time to speak a little bit more about the reduction in Russian gas and whether this just shifts supply to other buyers. I mean, I would say that the role of sanctions has been to prioritize greater energy security for Europe has been to decouple from Russia as well as hitting their export revenues, and we've seen a relative success in both of those, and I think the REPowerEU will help to consolidate this. In terms of LNG, Russia will struggle. For example, over half of all Russian LNG is currently coming to the EU. So where are they going to sell their gas? As you can see on a map, basically, most of Russian LNG production is on the western side of Russia. So it's really geared towards the EU market. If they can't sell to the EU, they will struggle to find sufficient buyers, or at least sufficient buyers willing to pay high prices that they would require. So if they don't sell to the EU, they'll have to transport that gas long distances, most likely towards Asia, on the form of LNG carriers, or they'll transit the Arctic route. But this is only available for about 3 months of the year. So they really are quite constrained. And you can see that Gazprom has been reporting billions of euros of losses each year. It's in a bad state at the moment. The gas sector is not thriving in Russia. And they will be forced to find new suppliers. I mean, there's a lot of talk around Power of Siberia 2 between Russia and China, a pipeline that would take many years to build to increase capacity of gas exports from Russia to China. But if they do so, they'll likely create new dependencies for Russia and have to offer discounts. So I do think that it's very important, in my view, that the EU acts as soon as possible to cut off supply from Russia. And yes, as we mentioned, they will likely find new buyers, likely in Asia, but at big discounts and with huge infrastructural or logistical constraints.
And what about the risk of rebranding Russian natural gas as Azerbaijan one for the EU? It is also by Velina Chakarova.
Yeah, that's a big issue, something we are concerned about. I guess we'll have to see how the Repower EU gets finalized. We mentioned in the presentation those 2 points where Russian gas, could be entering the EU. So requiring certification there is essential between Turkey and Bulgaria, as well as Turkey and Greece too. So there is, of course, opportunities for kind of laundering, and we've seen that a lot in the case of oil, where I'm more of a specialist on than gas. So maybe we'll pass to others if they want to add in, but definitely it is a concern. I'll pass. I think Alexander will probably have some more insight than me.
Yes, I mean, just to start with that, we are aware of this difficulty. As I was saying, we need to find a way to honor international law, to honor our own law, and to enable legal business to continue. Those two particular IPs are the most complicated ones. I think if one goes through the text of our proposal, and in particular how it was amended by the Council, there are straightforward places on the land border between the EU and Russia and Belarus. There we have to respect international law, and theoretically someone may want to import gas from Kazakhstan via Russia to the EU. So if this is honestly done, that's legal. If someone wants to cheat, this has to be prevented. Same story goes for the interconnection point Stranza 2, because this one may go through the territory of Turkey, but de facto is connected to the Russian network directly. So this is straightforward, and we end up with the 2 points that Isaac mentioned. Key point being basically not used today. There is no interconnection agreement on this point, and it is a kind of legacy IP where there was a contract with a Greek company. It could be revived, we don't know, but a priori it's fine. And we end up with Stranza 1, which currently has a technical capacity of 3.8 BCMs. Maybe this could change, but as of today, that's not such a big deal. The question is, how do we work with our partner country Turkey and with and anybody else to make sense of the gas that crosses this IP? How do we say this molecule is actually Russian? How do we believe or not believe a contract or a certificate that indicates that this actually comes from Azerbaijan? Should we make an immense model to measure how much Azerbaijan produced, how much they consumed, how much they imported, how much they exported, and via where? It becomes an implementation nightmare. So I think we're very vigilant on this, but we probably cannot simply say anything in Turkey is Russian, because it's factually not correct. And even in September at the Gaztec conference, BOTAŞ with the Turkish authorities announced a number of LNG contracts. By now, I think the US is the largest LNG exporter to Turkey, or if not the largest, certainly has a large chunk, and therefore a reasonable chunk of the domestic market. So the saying that this is all Russian because 40% on average is Russian is just false. So even if we were to take a majority rule, then it's not above 50. It's not above 50. So this is an implementation challenge. So I think, to sum up, we are aware, we are very vigilant on this. I think we put some caveats and reinforcements in the text as it is. As I was saying, Parliament is very determined, so I'm sure we have support there. But this is the physical reality of the world, of the network, how it's built, and of the flows, how they exist. And at the end of the day, let's be honest, there are people and entities who may want to cheat. So this has to be penalized at some point afterwards if the authorities are made aware of cheating, of course. Thanks.
Thank you. And the last question is for you, Peter. Hungary has interconnectors with Austria, Romania, and Slovakia, and has signed a contract with France's Energii to supply 4 billion cubic meters of gas after 28. How do you assess this contract and the prospects of concluding others to cover Hungary's immediate gas shortage needs?
Yes, this contract is 4 billion cubic meters, but for 10 years. So an annual volume is 0.4 billion cubic meter. I expect that there will be many similar contracts concluded, but only to the volume to cover the residential need. So I expect MVM to contract only up to this around 3 billion cubic meter. And I think the other needs of Hungary will be covered by shorter term deals as they are right now. So it will be the field of other traders. Yeah.
Thank you. And this would be the question for all of you, and to sum up also. But we spend a lot of time on talking about Russia and decoupling from Russia, but we still need to have in mind that it is not only about decoupling from Russia and diversification, looking for other contracts. It's also into the bigger picture and the bigger policy of decreasing generally reliance on imported fossil fuels. So the Russia is just the first step, let's say, as the most violent player in this game. And by the way, it is also a player which officially published in its strategic documents that implementing more renewables in the EU is a threat for Russian national interests. But going away from this policy, which is being implemented, as we heard, what is, in your opinion, what are the crucial steps to achieve the Power EU plan, other than just banning Russian fossil fuels? So the ultimate goal is to have no Russian resources until 2028, but also to decrease reliance on fossil fuels. So what is, apart from this Russian dimension, crucial for us to what kind of measures to take in the next years? Maybe Alexander, you would like to start.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'll have the most boring answer probably, but we need effort all across the board. The Commission has proposed a number of things and will be proposing a number of things in terms of improving power networks, because we need more electricity flows so that we can incorporate more renewables, so homegrown energy. So this is on the power side of things. I think often neglected is biomethane. We can use the gas network, the gas market that we have, to have a cleaner homegrown source. It was on your first slides, Maciej, the market grew from 3.5 to 6 BCMs more or less between 22 and now, or 23 or now. So the trend is actually, the curve is very steep. I mean, it's not a lot in total volumes, but the growth is there, and it's something our unit is also working on, how to speed up the deployment of this market, favor cross-border transactions. That's very important. Energy efficiency, that's another area that's very important, where I think the housing side of things is an essential one. We use roughly half of the gas we consume for heating and cooling. So that's an important area that has also a social dimension. And let's remember that our commissioner Dan Jorgensen is commissioner for energy and housing. So this is a place where citizens can feel that the transition is beneficial to them, and this is fundamental to get their buy-in and shield them from any mess that could happen later down the line, for instance, on the gas market. So this diversification of energy carriers and sources is fundamental. So sorry for not being more specific, but I think the Commission has proven in the last years to be really across the board and that we care about all those dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you. Isaac, Peter, would you like to comment and some conclusion?
Yeah, happy to chime in if helpful, and then I'll pass to Peter unless you want to go first. But I mean, we mentioned obviously kicking Russia out first in terms of reliance on imports. The EU paid about €1 trillion in energy subsidies to quell the supply constraints caused by Nord Stream 2 explosion, and you know this is the amount of money that Russia has earned on its total fossil fuel export revenues. So there's obviously the link to Europe's security as well as energy security. I mean, there's so many examples. I don't want to take everyone's time, but Russia has sent troops through the pipeline infrastructure in Ukraine. Russia has used shadow tankers to cut Europe's underwater telecommunication cables, interconnectors. There's so many examples of how reliance on Russian energy is used as blackmail and also poses military threat. So making sure that there's this 1.5% commitment that NATO countries have to spend on increasing resilience and I believe it's resilience and security. And I personally believe that clean energy development must be included in this. I think there is also a fear that we can't produce solar panels and wind turbines domestically in the EU, and we can't compete with China. But I don't think this is true, and should be where we should also put a lot of focus. So, reducing total gas consumption through developments of clean energy and reducing reliance on other countries would probably be essential, and really making that link between people's security militarily as well as to attain kind of affordable and uninterrupted supply of energy too. Thanks. I'll pass to Peter without rambling. Sorry.
Thank you. Well, I can only agree with the points made before. I just would like to highlight one, that demand reduction is the most important point in ending dependence on fossil fuels. But it must be stressed that in many countries there is still end-user price regulation for residential consumers. And it is not only focusing on the vulnerable consumers, but all the residential consumers or all consumer groups. And this creates still overconsumption. So we have to protect consumers from price hikes, of course, but it must be sure that the consumers are paying the real price of energy in any case, because otherwise there are no incentives for energy efficiency and demand reduction. So that's the only point I would like to make. I think that's quite important in this region around Hungary.
Thank you very much. So yeah, we are living in very interesting times, and REPowerEU is just one of the challenges for the EU right now to implement. But I think that it is very important also to remember that it is not only about kicking Russia out, but it is about the whole energy transition in the EU, and this is also about ending a situation in which we are, as the EU, spending more or less the same amount of money for imported resource, for imported fossil fuels, as we have the overall amount of the EU budget. So just for you to compare how big amount of money it is, and just being decoupling from the most violent player in this market. It's not the essence of the policy. It's just the step of this politics, in my opinion. So thank you very much, Alexander, Peter, Isaac, and Maciej Ciszewski for joining us. Thank you for asking questions and listening to us. This meeting has been recorded, so it will be available online as well, and we will follow up in the future with also our analysis. By the way, coming analysis on biomethane, domestically produced biomethane, as well as one of the elements of this policy mentioned by Alexander. Thank you very much and have a nice day.